Rev up your engines!
Xavier Cardenas says, Scotty, I got an 01 GMC 4.8 single cab truck with an oil pressure needle pegged at 80 psi. What could be the problem? Oil level is good, doesn't show any leaks, and has 120,000 miles. You want to make sure that that isn't real, that it's really got 80 psi. If you don't have one, pay a mechanic like me to remove the oil pressure sending unit and to screw in an actual pressure gauge. All we mechanics have actual pressure gauges, and you can buy them online cheaply enough, 40 or 50 bucks, and see what the actual pressure is. Now, if you find the oil pressure is actually 90 psi, don't drive it anymore, because that means that you have a restriction somewhere. Now, you might think, high oil pressure, what do you mean restriction? Well, if you get a restriction somewhere beyond where that gauge is, the pressure before the restriction is going to go high, and then after that restriction, the pressure is going to be too low and it's going to damage your engine. So you want to see if you actually have that high a reading. I doubt if you do. It's probably just a false reading. But you got to check it with a gauge. And if it does really have too high, stop driving it and find out where the problem is. Because somewhere you got a real bad restriction that's making the lower pressure go high. And then after that restriction, it's too low and you're going to get engine damage. Mars. Scotty, awesome videos. I have an 02 Ford Ranger. Keeps blowing fuses. Just replaced the blower motor. And I went to the panel switches. What the heck's going on here? Fuses blow because you're getting too much power running through the system, which you either have a dead short, something like a motor that's pulling too many amps, a bad blower motor resistor that pulls too many, or a wiring problem somewhere that's draining either power or ground. Electrical work is never any fun because you never know what's doing it. There's so many things in an electrical series that can go wrong, and you have to test them all. You got to go through the wiring harness. You got to go through the ground to see if there's a ground fault problem. Since you said you changed the blower motor switches, well, try the blower motor resistor. A lot of times that assembly goes bad. And especially pay attention to where the wiring plugs into the blower motor resistor. They were made like crap, and a lot of times all those little pins short out, and you'll see some of the wires are melted. Then you'd have to cut them all off and rewire them with a new splice kit. They make the splice kits because they break all the time. You check that first because that's a known fault on those things. Fernando Navarro says, Scotty, would you buy a 2009 RX 350 Lexus for 10 grand with 100,000 miles? Well, I bought my wife's ES 300 for 4 grand with 60,000 miles. So I would try to pay less. But if you like the vehicle and you can't get any lower, go ahead. You still want a mechanic like me to check it out to go through all the tests. But those are pretty solid vehicles. I've seen those things with 250,000 miles, still had original engines and trannies and ran pretty good. So, you know, if you don't mind the price and the mechanic says it's in good shape, go right ahead. I would just try to pay less because you're not getting any guarantee on it. And, you know, you're talking about an 11-year-old car. And if you can't get them any lower and you like it, go ahead. They are good cars. Alberto Mayo says, what do you think about the Ford Broncos? You know, the Ford Broncos really started the first SUV movement. And they were the first ones to put all-wheel drive on something besides just a pure truck. And they kept putting bigger engines in them. And they were interesting vehicles. I mean, I had customers that had them in the past. They loved them. A lot of guys are fixing them up. They become collector's items. And, you know, they're gas hogs. There are no ifs, ands about that. But the old ones, they were really simple technology, easy to fix. You could drive them forever. And if you live in an area that does emissions testing every year, they don't test the old emissions one much at all. So you don't have to worry about getting your car inspected every year. Ain't a bunch of money because it doesn't have to be tested. The ones here in Texas, if it's more than 25 years old, you don't need to do emissions testing. So they can be very inexpensive to drive and maintain. Tony Castro says, 2009 Ram 1500 with a 5.7 Hemi. Mechanically okay, should I stay away? Well, those are good engines. Have the engines checked out. You just have to realize the rest of the vehicle, they have ball joint problems. They get electronic problems. They have air conditioning problems. Now, it's, you know, it's an 11-year-old Dodge Ram truck. If it checks out okay when a mechanic looks at it and you're not paying that much, you know, it might not be a bad thing for a in-between vehicle, but don't expect to buy something like that and put a lot of trouble-free miles and not put a lot of money in fixing it. That's just how those things are. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.